Stop scrolling and stay with this until the very end, because what you are about to uncover is not just a trail of documents. It is a map of hidden movements that were never meant to be seen. And once you follow this path closely, you will understand how the name of Yu Menglong became connected to a network so complex that even the people inside it believed it could never be fully exposed. And today we are walking through every layer of that system step by step until the illusion of invisibility begins to fall apart. It started with something small, not a headline, not a major leak, just a fragment, a record that did not match the pattern it was supposed to follow. At first glance, it looked ordinary, routine, the kind of entry that appears thousands of times across systems designed to track financial movement. But the detail that made it different was timing, because timing in financial systems is never random. And this record appeared at a moment where nothing should have been moving. That was the first crack. From there, the trail began to unfold. Not quickly, not easily, because systems like this are designed to resist exposure. Every layer built to hide the one beneath it. Every connection masked by another name, another entity, another structure that creates distance between the source and the destination. But distance can be measured. And once it is measured, it can be followed. The next discovery came through alignment. Multiple entities appearing disconnected on the surface, but moving in coordination beneath. Not identical, but synchronized. Transfers that mirrored each other in pattern even when they carried different names. That is not coincidence. That is design. And design always leaves traces. The shell companies began to reveal themselves one by one, not as obvious structures, but as fragments of a larger system, each one holding just enough information to remain functional, but not enough to reveal the full picture on its own. Names that seemed unfamiliar, addresses that pointed to locations that did not match their scale, operations that existed on paper but nowhere else. And yet they moved money, consistently, precisely, as if guided by something larger than their individual existence. Following that movement required patience, because every step forward came with resistance. Not visible resistance, but structural. Records that ended just before they should. Connections that stopped one step short of confirmation. But patterns do not disappear just because they are incomplete. They continue. And when enough of them are placed together, they form something undeniable. That is when the frozen assets enter the story. Not as a single event, but as a series of actions. Accounts flagged, movements paused, capital held in place at the exact moment it was meant to disappear into another layer. And that pause changed everything. Because once movement stops, it creates a snapshot. A moment where everything that was in motion becomes visible all at once. That snapshot revealed connections that had never been seen together before. Entities that once appeared separate now linked through timing and direction. And at the center of those connections, a name began to appear more consistently. Not loudly, not directly, but enough to raise a question that could no longer be ignored. How was Yu Menglong connected to this network? The answer did not come in a single document. It came through accumulation, through repeated alignment, through the same patterns appearing across different layers of the system, the same pathways, the same timing, the same structure guiding movement from one point to another. And that consistency created something powerful. Clarity, not complete, but enough. Enough to understand that what existed here was not random. It was intentional, designed, maintained, protected by complexity itself. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer one thing became. This was not about one transaction or one entity. It was about a network, a system that relied on invisibility, on the assumption that no one would ever connect the fragments, because the fragments were never meant to be seen together. But now they were, placed side by side, revealing a structure that once existed only in pieces. The final layer did not expose everything, because systems like this are never fully revealed at once. But it exposed enough. Enough to confirm that the frozen assets were not isolated. They were part of something larger, something that extended beyond a single point of control. something that had operated quietly until the moment it was forced into stillness. And that stillness is what allowed this story to exist. Without it, everything would have continued moving, hidden, untraceable. But now the movement has been interrupted, and interruption creates visibility. So this story does not end with a complete exposure. It ends with something more significant, a system that has been forced into the light, a network that can no longer rely on complete invisibility, a trail that has been followed far enough to change how everything is understood moving forward. And now the only question that remains is this. When a network built on secrecy is finally slowed down enough to be seen, does it collapse under the weight of its own exposure? Or does it adapt and disappear once again into a deeper layer where it becomes even harder to find? The moment the flow of money stopped was the moment everything became visible, and if you stay with this until the very end, you're going to understand why the freeze did not just pause transactions. It exposed a structure that had been moving in perfect silence, and once the layers around Yu Menglong began to slow down, the connections that once felt impossible to trace started aligning in ways no one expected. At first, nothing looked different. The same names, the same entities, the same carefully constructed pathways. But when movement stops, patterns become clearer, because patterns rely on motion to stay hidden. And without that motion, they begin to stand still long enough to be studied. The investigators did not rush. They could not. Rushing breaks the process. And this process required precision. Every document examined, every timestamp compared, every transfer mapped against another. And slowly, something began to form. Not a single line, but a network. A structure that showed how one entity fed into another. How one transaction triggered a sequence that extended far beyond its starting point. The shell companies were no longer just names on paper. They became points on a map. Each one connected. Each one serving a purpose. Some existed to receive. Some to redirect. Some to hold. And together they created a system that could move value across distances without drawing attention. Until now. Because now the attention was fixed, focused, unwavering. The deeper the analysis went, the more consistent the patterns became. The same routes appearing again and again. The same timing intervals repeating with slight variations. Enough to avoid detection, but not enough to disappear completely. And that repetition led to something critical. A convergence point. A place where multiple paths intersected. Not directly, but close enough to suggest coordination. And at that point, the structure became undeniable. This was not random movement. This was design. Intentional. Maintained over time. Protected by complexity itself. The frozen assets were not just a result. They were a signal. A signal that something within the system had triggered a response strong enough to halt movement entirely. And when movement stops, everything inside the system is forced to remain in place. Exposed. For a brief moment, but long enough to capture what had once been invisible. The final layer revealed something unexpected. Not a single controlling entity, but multiple points of influence. Working independently yet connected through shared pathways. A system that did not rely on one center, but many. And that made it stronger. Harder to dismantle. Because removing one part would not collapse the whole. It would simply adjust, adapt, continue. And that realization changed the direction of everything. Because this was no longer about tracing one line. It was about understanding an entire structure. A structure that extended beyond what had initially been suspected. Beyond what had been visible at the start. And now the focus shifted. From exposure to implication. What does this mean? What happens next? Can a system like this be fully uncovered? Or will it always remain partially hidden behind the layers it was built upon? Yu Menglong remained at the center of the discussion. Not as the only point of interest, but as the connection that brought everything into focus. Because sometimes one name becomes the key that unlocks a much larger picture. The final moment did not come with a conclusion. It came with understanding. Not complete, but enough. Enough to know that what had been uncovered was only part of something bigger. Enough to know that the freeze had revealed more than it had concealed. Enough to know that the system had been seen, even if only briefly. So this story does not end with full exposure. It does not end with every layer revealed. It ends with something more powerful. Visibility. A system that once relied on invisibility, now partially understood. A network that can no longer operate with the same certainty. A structure that has been interrupted. And that interruption is what changes everything moving forward. Because once something hidden is seen, even for a moment, it can never return to being completely invisible again. And now the only question that remains is this. When a system built to remain unseen is finally exposed, even partially, does it begin to collapse under the weight of that exposure? Or does it evolve into something even more complex, waiting for the next moment it can disappear once again?